We are now going to get on to our very first session here this morning, and we are delighted to be able to have Chris Hunter here. Chris is an author, a bomb disposal expert, and a former British Army officer. He will tell you a bit more about himself and what he's done. But he retired from the MOD in January 2007 and has gone on to become a prominent author, broadcaster and speaker. No pressure, Chris, but we found out that you were once named one of the top 5 inspirational speakers by JLA Speakers Agency. So I'm sure we're all in for a treat. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Chris come on and explain who he is, what he does, and I'm sure we'll take a lot out from his session. So please give Chris a warm welcome.
Thanks very much. You know, as you said, was once one of the top 5 speakers, so you've obviously dipped out there. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here today, actually, because it's great to actually be with a real live audience again. Real people face to face. Finally, we got there. I'm going to basically just talk a bit about bomb disposal. To many people, it seems like a very unusual career, but for me, it's obviously, absolute bread and butter, normal everyday stuff. And hopefully when I talk about it, I'm just going to sort of give you some insights into my world and hopefully make you realise that the parallels are very similar to your world as well. We may not actually walk the same landscape. You may not be sort of on your belt buckle dealing with an improvised explosive device that would, the same sort of size as these 7.7 bombs, that sort of thing. But the stress that we experience is exactly the same. The pressures we experience is exactly the same. And basically our everyday wants and desires are pretty much exactly the same as well, i.e. getting home to our families at the end of the week or, going to have some fun. So without any further ado, I'm going to talk about my story very quickly, really, for about the next 15 minutes. I joined the Army in 1989 as a 16-year-old. My father had died. He was a bomb disposal operator as it happened in the Second World War. I didn't actually realise that at the time. He was quite old. He lied to my mum about his age. He changed his passport because it used to be written in pen. So he changed it from 1917 to 1927. And she fell for it, but obviously then he got really old and died. So I was quite young. I joined the Army at 16, otherwise I was going to probably go to prison, realistically. And I got a GCSE in German, a grade A. I got about 5 GCSEs in total. I wasn't the brightest, the sharpest tool in the box, because I was good at stealing cars and getting into trouble with the police and things like that. But I managed to get a grade A at GCSE, German. So there was a shortage of Russian linguists in British military intelligence. And it was 1989, the Cold War was still on. So someone decided it'd be a great idea to recruit 16-year-old boys to become the next James Bond. So they said, who wants to be James Bond? We all put our hands in the air, obviously. Who doesn't want to be James Bond at 16? And spent the next 2 years in a language laboratory conjugating Russian verbs. It wasn't really what it was sold to us to be. I was also the worst Russian speaker in the history of British military intelligence. That's an absolute fact. That's not me being humble. I was useless. But I managed to pass, got through it, and went on to do some continuation training as a young NCO, non-commissioned officer, and worked in intelligence and learned a lot about intelligence, but they didn't put me anywhere where anyone spoke any Russian, obviously, because I would have got it wrong and been really crap. So then when I was 21, I went to Sandhurst, to the military academy, and decided to go and get a proper job and do something for real. So I went there. Many of you might have heard of Sandhurst, the Leadership Academy. Basically, they talk about it being the finest leadership academy in the world. They just basically beast you. You do loads and loads of running, loads of push-ups, loads of exercise all the time, loads of sleep deprivation because you can't simulate the pressures of war in training, obviously. So what they do is they just basically beast you physically and make sure you get no sleep. And obviously we'll get a bit grumpy, don't we, when we haven't slept, so they can see who the sort of natural leaders are. So a year of that, got through that, and then basically what they do is then they send the men and women that are commissioned from Sandhurst to the war zone of the day, effectively. So for me, when I was there, it was Bosnia, 1995. And the reason why they sent young cadets who had recently commissioned to go and command a troop of 45, maybe 60 young soldiers, is to get them effectively, blooded. The idea is to cut their teeth in a real operational environment. and you go away as a boy or as a girl, you come back as a man or a woman, basically. So I'm not going to harp on about Bosnia. It was a great learning experience. I got really, really close to my team, managed to win their respect eventually after lots of faux pas, and then came back with them all alive. So that was a huge bonus. Obviously, the aim for any army officer is always to get your guys back alive, and if you can achieve that 100%, that's a huge sort of success, really. So we all came back from there, and we went on a bit of leave. I got sent on to do some Arctic warfare training, and was told then we were going to deploy as a troop to Northern Ireland to do security duties there. So to prepare us for Northern Ireland, we then went to the jungle and did some jungle warfare training, and then went out to Northern Ireland and basically did static security, looking after one of the camps. It was all very sort of routine, humdrum, and it was starting to get to a ceasefire, which was great. But the IRA used to end a ceasefire or start a ceasefire with a huge sort of vehicle bomb or a truck bomb or something like that. So we all thought it was pretty safe and hunky-dory. And then I was driving into the headquarters one day in Northern Ireland, and a huge explosion occurred by the medical centre, in the car park there. And then, you know, when you sort of go to that, when you're stuck in traffic and you can't really go forwards or backwards, there's not really anything you can do. I was just stuck in the car, you know, completely futile, watching the whole world go into chaos. And they locked down the camp, so I couldn't even get inside. And the guys that were behind me in their car basically got out and ran away. So I was just stuck there watching this whole episode unfold. And it was really interesting because, as you would expect, people were sort of, you know, shocked and panicky, and they were sort of standing and, you know, all dazed and stuff. And then they basically realised what was going on and then started to run away from the danger area. And of course, some people ran towards the danger area, and those were the medics carrying out the life-saving first aid. And then there was also some guys in, you know, normal sort of civilian clothes, and they were smashing all the windows of the cars to see if there was another car bomb there, basically. And interestingly, they were at the far end of the car park, and a second car bomb detonated right next to the medical centre. They basically put it there to kill the wounded and to kill the medics. It was particularly horrendous. Luckily, there weren't that many deaths and injuries, but it was one of those things, you know, you're just stuck there watching it, unable to do anything to help. But I saw the guys that were running towards the cars and smashing all the windows, and they were what are called ATOs, Ammunition Technical Officers, the British Army's counter-terrorist bomb technicians. So I thought, that's what I really fancy doing. That's going to be the job for me. The problem was, of course, I was a complete biff. I wasn't very academic. You do degree-level nuclear physics, explosive chemistry, metallurgy, ballistics, that sort of stuff. Not the sort of stuff you do at GCSE, really. So it's 14 months long, 200 plus exams, and you're only allowed to fail 3 exams. And you can fail them at any time, and then you're out. So I managed to fail 2 in my first week. So it was, you know, quite a stressful period for me. And what's interesting in bomb disposal, when we talk about stress, we often talk about self-induced stress. When we're doing assessment tasks, or certainly in the old days, you know, when I was a bit younger, you do 4 assessment tasks every 6 months to make sure that you're still good to go. And people would fail those because of the self-induced pressure. And when they go into a real bomb, it's really, really easy, you know. So it was exactly the same on this course. It tests your self-induced pressure. So anyway, blah, 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 went through that, and then went to the Bomb Disposal Regiment, 11 EOD Regiment in the UK. There's 11 troops based around the UK to respond to any incidents, and the Met Police has their own organic capability that's retired bomb technicians from the Army. And you do a couple of years there on the pager, as it used to be, basically 24/7 response, and you know, you're working against what we call the mad, the bad, and the sad, the criminals, the cranks, and the domestic terrorists. And then once you've done that for a little while, you're then allowed to go and attend the high threat course, which is the course where it really sort of, you know, makes or breaks you as a bomb technician, as an ATO. If you pass it, you can stay in the profession for the rest of your career. If you fail it, then you go and work in an ammunition depot or some sort of logistics supply job, which isn't really what bomb technicians really want to do. So we went and did this course, and I spoke to my warrant officer who'd been conned to become a bomb technician. He basically was a banker, and he wanted to do a sort of, you know, very easy, sedentary type job. And he said, oh yeah, you'll just be working with ammunition and inspecting it, very, very easy. And then within 6 months, he was in Northern Ireland back in the 70s when it was really, really dangerous. And interestingly, he got 3 gallantry medals, actually. And he told me he'd never done a live device sober. So that's also a little bit of a theme as well. But one of the bits of advice he gave me was when I said, any tips to go on this high-threat course, because I want to stay in the profession and love it, yada, yada, yada. And he said, don't learn the tricks of the trade, learn the trade. And I think that's sort of a lesson that certainly carried through with me for the rest of my life. So I got through that, went out to Northern Ireland, did some bits and pieces there, and then carried on with my training and development. We all learned to do weapons of mass destruction, so you learn to deal with terrorist nuclear weapons, biological, chemical weapons, all that sort of stuff. And then you basically just keep going to Northern Ireland or wherever the high-threat theatre of the day is. Now it's Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and places like that. And then I got married. I foolishly said to the 11 guys that were on my course, yeah, it'd be great if you could help me. Maybe you could do the firework display at our wedding. And on the day of the wedding, one of the guys, he'd said to me beforehand, do you want any more fireworks? And I said, no, I've got about 500 quid worth, which then was a lot. And he said, well, I've got to destroy loads because basically we've just been given loads in Northern Ireland. I said, well, I have a few rockets if you've got any rockets. And on the day of the wedding, a 4-ton truck turned up with rockets, mortars. It was literally it would supply an entire war zone for a few months. So turned up and they set up this firework display in the morning. That was great. We got married about 11 o'clock, but the firework display was about 10 o'clock at night. And as I've already alluded, bomb technicians like to have a drink as well. So they were absolutely smashed. And you know those sort of scenes in the Somme that you see, the black and white video footage, where they sort of see the silhouettes of the soldiers as the explosions are going off behind them. It was like the most fantastic firework display ever. And then suddenly one of my mates, I saw him silhouetted holding his head in his hands. And you're supposed to put like 5 mortars in maximum. And he put like 25 in or something because he was so pissed. And it blew up in his face. He was blinded. We were both court-martialed. And then somehow we got away with it. And he got his sight back. And he got promoted to major. And I got sent to the SAS, which is like every soldier's dream, really. So you'll see as I talk through this, it's not about sort of skill and amazing courage and that sort of stuff. I've very much Forrest Gumped my way through my career, really. So the SAS was awesome. It was working on the hostage rescue teams. I was actually asked to go and do a bank job at one point, which when I was there, the sergeant major said, in this regiment, you'll find the truth is stranger than the fiction. So got to do some fascinating stuff, but largely it was hostage rescue, and I do all the bombs in a hostage rescue type incident. So I spent 2 years there. All I'd say about that is, does anyone know the motto of the SAS? Who dares wins? Yeah, of course, there's a TV show now, isn't it? Yeah. So who dares wins. What's interesting is you never ever hear that in the regiment. It's kind of a given, but what you hear all the time is the basics done well. And that's what sets them apart, really, from the other guys in the army. They just do the basics really, really, really well, and there's this sort of unrelenting pursuit of excellence. So it's great to be amongst people like that because obviously it rubs off, doesn't it? And then I went and did a couple of years with the Special Boat Service, doing the maritime stuff as well, parachuting into the sea. And then we hadn't got a capability for dealing with suicide bombers, so I was asked to produce the standing operated procedures to deal with a suicide bomber, working with the Metropolitan Police. And it was quite interesting because, the phrase, how can you defeat an enemy who looks into the barrel of your gun and sees paradise? My response was, well, you just pull the trigger, don't you? But that's obviously not the response that they were looking for, So we had to come up with some very sort of tactile, user-friendly procedures to immobilize suicide bombers without killing them and all that sort of stuff. I spent a couple of years doing it, and it was quite interesting. But what was really interesting was that there had never been a suicide bombing incident in the UK, and nobody thought we'd ever see one. So as a result, all of my colleagues thought we were wasting taxpayers' money. They said, you shouldn't be doing this. It's an absolute waste of time. It will never happen here. And my response was, it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And of course, a few months later, this guy, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, he failed to detonate his shoe bomb on a transatlantic flight. And then this guy, Sajid Badat, he had the second shoe bomb in his house in Gloucester. So we went in and kicked down the doors and arrested him and his colleagues in Gloucestershire to prevent another suicide attack. But of course, we went to the wrong house first, kicked down the wrong door. It's supposed to be ground floor. We went up a flight of stairs, apologised to the residents, came back down and then went in the right door next door. Because that's the way it really works on there. And then went out to Colombia, worked with MI, one of the intelligence agencies as a covert bomb technician, which was great. And the only thing I'm going to say about this is never underestimate how much a team can achieve when no one cares who gets the credit. Because with the security services, they never get any credits. They only ever get criticised if they get it wrong. So, they can't basically herald their successes. It's only the failures that come out into the public domain. And they're hugely, hugely motivated, really, really professional. And I think that's down to the fact that no one individual gets the credit. They all sort of have that sense of gratification, really, about a job well done. And maybe we'll talk about that in the questions afterwards, Omar. And then I went to, my boss said to me, you're going to go and do the world's most dangerous job in the world's most dangerous place. This is when my wife said to me, go and get a proper job or I'm going to divorce you, basically. A week later, I was going to Iraq. And basically, the IRA in 30 years had become the world's leading terrorists in terms of bomb making. And within 1 year in Iraq, the terrorists had superseded that level of technical ability. So it was literally rock and roll. Everything we were the best, the British were definitely the best. And suddenly we had to, eat a bit of humble pie and learn from scratch again, because these guys were really, really good at what they were doing. Maybe we could talk a little about the long walk, but basically 4 days in, normally you'd have 2 weeks to acclimatise, but there just wasn't the opportunity to acclimatise there. It just wasn't going to happen because we didn't have enough bomb technicians. So 3 days in, I was chasing a terrorist over a roof, and 4 days in was doing my first task in the bomb suit. And it's 50 degrees Celsius there in that heavy 70-pound suit. So like a true professional, at the end of the task, I keeled over with heat exhaustion, did a sort of massive projectile vomit, and then woke up in the medical centre, regained consciousness in there with all the blokes prodding me and taking the mickey and telling me how useless I was. So after that, I didn't wear the bomb suit again for the rest of the 4 months I was there. And hopefully, this is a bank of rockets. There was 8 of them, and they were on a stuck-fast timer with 1 minute left on it. And we couldn't get a robot to it, so I had to go and do it all by hand. So there we go. Right, I'll just spend another 5 minutes, if that's okay, just talking a little bit about risk and that sort of stuff. Is that okay? Is everyone happy with that? So there were constant rocket and mortar attacks. I remember the first day I got there, there was a mortar attack, so I dived underneath the table, which is what you're supposed to do, ordered all the guys to get underneath the tables, and they just looked at me like I was a complete lunatic. And, obviously it was an everyday occurrence and everyone became very desensitized to it. On a personal level, because I wasn't wearing the protective bomb suit anymore, snipers were also a big concern, as were the threats from rocket-propelled grenades and sort of roadside ambushes. And you see the guys here, they would dig it in at the side of the road and just wait for any sort of passing convoy to come along and then fire it off and use that to launch some sort of ambush. Now, the biggest risk and the thing that I hated most was camel spiders. Have any of you seen these before? So they're called a sepulchid. They're a cross between a spider and a scorpion. And they can run 10 miles an hour. They can jump 3 feet into the air. And they only come out when they're going to hunt. And they're quite serious. They basically inject an anesthetic into you so you can't feel it when they start munching away on your flesh. So there were soldiers with sort of bits of their calf muscle missing, and in one case, someone with a bit of his cheek missing because a spider had climbed on there. So those things used to absolutely terrify me. And the only thing worse than the camel spider was the creature in the top left there. And he decided it would be a good idea to publish some fake pictures and a fake article in the Mirror about soldiers carrying out atrocities to Iraqis. Now, I don't know why to this day the soldiers decided to stage some photographs. We think it was probably an exercise that they were doing and they got a bit out of hand. But it wasn't real, it wasn't in Iraq, and anyone in the military, including Piers Morgan's brother who told him he was in the military, he decided he was going to go ahead and publish the photographs. So as a result of that, we were on the ground the next day dealing with 3 improvised explosive devices, usually start about 8 o'clock in the morning and then you'd go until 11 o'clock at night. And 4 days into my tour, this guy, Bahadli, Sheikh Bahadli, issued a fatwa against British forces because of the article that Piers Morgan published. So as a result of that, we were driving back one evening on the 8th of May, about 11:15 at night. Nothing unusual, nothing untoward. People sitting outside the front of their houses, smoking shisha pipes, playing dominoes, that sort of stuff. And then suddenly 2 guys just stood up and ran into the house. And you know that sort of moment when the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end? You know, where you sense impending danger, absence of the normal and presence of the abnormal. That's exactly what it was. And I got on the radio and just said, stand by, which wasn't a normal military command, it was an SAS command. But it was just intuitive and instinctive. And the guys, luckily, basically started sparking a little bit, were a bit more focused. And then the whole of the right-hand side of the road, all these guys smoking shisha and drinking chai, they basically pulled their Kalashnikovs and their rocket-propelled grenades and opened up on us and unleashed hell. And it was the most terrifying thing that I've ever experienced, to be honest with you. And maybe we could talk about that in the questions. And the communications were all shot up. We couldn't communicate with anybody. And one of the vehicles got bogged down and stayed behind. So 2 of the vehicles managed to escape, mine and the vehicle in front, and one of the vehicles was stuck behind. So we decided we were going to go on a suicide mission and go back and get them because we didn't have any comms to get any support. And maybe we can chat about that afterwards as well. We did 45 tasks in 8 weeks after that. That was a baptism of fire, really. 4 days in, getting ambushed and all that sort of shenanigans. And in terms of dealing with fear, whether it's an ambush, whether it's everyday fear, whatever it may be, if we've experienced that situation before, we're able to build up our muscle memory effectively, okay? If you go into a situation where you haven't got muscle memory, your limbic system at the back of your brain, then what happens is you use the prefrontal cortex at the front of your brain. And as a result of that, the neurosignals are inhibited when you're under stress. So you're not able to think freely like you would do normally because you rely on the limbic system. So as a result of that, if you've not trained for something, if it's something unusual, then you freeze. Because you've not trained for it, you can't draw upon your muscle memory, okay? So I don't know if any of you have been in an ambush before, but because even the military aren't allowed to realistically train for ambushes, then you don't respond the way you really would want to. So we all sort of froze. For what seemed like hours, it was only a couple of minutes, to be honest with you, and then basically fought fire with fire and fought for our lives to get out of there. But if you haven't experienced an ambush, how many of you have ever you're all alpha males and females in the room, how many of you have ever, when you were younger, met someone that you really liked, fancied them, and you're normally very articulate and confident, but you found yourself talking utter gibberish and gobbledygook because you felt under pressure? Has anyone experienced that before? Yeah, and when you meet someone senior in the organisation, you're all sort of confident, you know your job, you know exactly what's going on, and then you meet them and for some reason you feel slightly overwhelmed and you start talking rubbish again, yeah? That's because you're under pressure and you can't rely on your frontal cortex. So, as a result of that, I think maybe we can talk a little bit about fear of failure and fear of change, because for me, I've had the luxury and the honour of working with some truly amazing people, both in the military, with the special forces, the intelligence, the sort of top tier, and also since, speaking to organisations like yourselves. And I've learned an awful lot from doing this. But the one thing I've seen is these alpha males and females with 40-pound brains, hugely, hugely talented, educated, capable, Olympic levels of fitness in some cases. The one thing that curtails them is fear of failure or fear of ridicule by somebody else. And how many of you in the room actually have the time to bother your asses ridiculing somebody else? We just don't, do we? And yet all of us are worried about what other people think. So I think, that's something that's, danger is real, but fear is just an emotion. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I'll just show you this. A fatwa was issued against me personally after that because we were finding lots of IEDs and deciding to shoot the archer, not the arrow. Basically, not just rendering safe the IEDs, improvised explosive devices, but actually looking at the components, looking at the DNA, the forensics, the biometrics, and going back to back from the boom, if you like, and finding the bomb makers themselves. And we started having some success. So Bahadli and his cohorts issued a fatwa against the golden-haired bomb man. I was the only bomb man in Basra, and I happen to get blonde hair when I'm in the sun, so it kind of narrowed it down when the intelligence guy said, "We think there's a threat against you, So they put a price on my head, and I was a bit worried about it, to be honest with you. It feels very personal when someone's going to assassinate you. And I thought about it and thought, you know what? to be honest with you, we were all threats anyway, you know, so it didn't really make any difference. The fact that I might be worth another $50 or something, you know, whatever, you just get on with it, don't you? And they put a car bomb outside a hospital, knowing that if it's a device that you've got to, there's a potential for massive death and injury, then you have to dispense with your robot, dispense with all your equipment and bomb suit. You run down with a set of snips, and you earn your Queen's Gallantry Medal, basically, by smashing the windows and doing everything by hand. This was the car outside the hospital. It was placed by Shia insurgents, and it was a Sunni hospital. The only people they hated more than the British Army were the other sect of Islam, basically. So that was fine. There was no way I was going to run down and do that by hand because I'm not brave at all. So what I did was I went through the window at the side, ran into the front, and said, "Does anyone here speak English?" And of course, nobody spoke English. So I pulled out my pistol, waved it around, and said, "Does anyone here speak English?" And suddenly, a few people spoke English. That was good. So I said, "Go to the back." They all ran to the back of the hospital, and they were out of the blast range. And then I told my number 2 to send the robot down, and this is what happened. I got on the radio and said, "You're just going to hear a small pop." And you know when you open the car door or the boots and the light comes on? They'd wired it into that for me to get blown to pieces, basically. So that was quite lucky. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, basically. That's the end of it, because I think otherwise we're going to run out of time. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Chris. I don't know about you, but I was really enjoying that. I'd have happily had you just go on, but I'll ask you some questions anyway. And please do ask any questions. We've only got 15 minutes, but please do ask questions, wave your hand, or shout at me. Fascinating, and thank you for your service, first of all. I mean, it's obviously unimaginable looking back on kind of what you've done in that environment as well. You went on to, obviously you're here today and you've had quite a media career off the back of it. How was it making that transition? I mean, we'll talk about some of the psychological issues and how they relate to leadership and pressure. But how have you found making that transition to being, if I could be reductive and say, media personality?
It was quite difficult, actually. I mean, I was definitely sort of C or D list, so I wasn't like a media personality, but just sort of, you know, getting makeup and putting a mic on and all that sort of stuff, going on to, I did lots and lots of television news, really, about terrorism, and there were quite a lot of terrorist incidents, you know, a few years back. So I would only go on TV when there was a terrorist attack in the UK, which wasn't very pleasant in that respect. It was quite easy, but the transition was, I decided I wanted to write a book when I left the military. I worked for some amazing leaders right the way through my career. And then in my final job, which was an intelligence job, where we were going all over the world, tracking down bomb makers, it was amazing, you know, sort of James Bond stuff, really. And I worked for the biggest knob end in the British military ever. He was a really bad man. They used to call him Voldemort. So I decided that, you know, I used to run into work from Putney and cycle back every day. I was much, much slimmer and fitter then. And I found myself thinking about ways we could potentially all top him without getting caught, you know. And we're not psychopaths, by the way, you know, usually. So I realised it wasn't very healthy, you know, and I realised I got to the end of my career, I'd stopped enjoying it, even though it was the best job in the world. So I wrote a book. You're supposed to write 3 chapters. I got it rejected twice, and I thought, fuck it, I'm going to just send a sheet of A4. So I sent it to Andy McNabb's agent, who did all the SAS books and stuff like that, Mark Lucas, and he phoned me up in our Christmas party and said, "Oh, I've always wanted to do a book about bomb disposal. This is brilliant. You can write. I'm going to show you how to write a bestseller, basically." And I wrote it all myself. You know, a lot of military people have ghostwriters. I was very solid when I was 16, but I did learn to read and write by the end of my career, so that was good. And he just said, basically, you can write, but I want you to take us on a journey with you, yada, yada, yada. So he gave me loads of tips, and I rewrote the first one, and then wrote the second one in about 6 months. But as a result of that, you do book talks, and on the back of the book talk, someone said, "Oh, actually, you know, it'd be quite interesting to hear you as a public speaker." And then just got into public speaking. And then basically got a bit carried away with myself, moved to London, had a great life. I worked undercover in Soho for one of the government agencies as a retired army officer who'd written some books and was a bit of a playboy, basically. And there's a strip club in Soho that's the Europe's money laundering capital. So I used to go in there every night, drinking with the gangsters, the triads and the Albanians. And eventually one of the guys was very, very drunk. And he said, "He's fucking old Bill." Because I looked like the fat bloke from The Bill. Do you remember him? So that was that. My cover was blown because of the Bill, yeah. And then I just basically, I'd got too much into role. I'd become one of them, basically. So I decided I needed we basically, with the sum of our experiences, our DNA, our genes, if you like, and our environment. And we can't change our DNA, we can't change our experiences, but we can change our environment. So I thought, I'm going to get back into bomb disposal. And also, it's pretty crap when you're standing up as a former bomb disposal operator. So it's nice to be able to sort of, last week I did 75 devices, and I think I'm about to do my 1,000th IED before the end of the summer. So
it's incredible. And you helped produce the Hurt Locker. How realistic generally are depictions of bomb disposal in films and television? I don't know if you've seen that recent ITV show Trigger Point, for example.
Well, I loved the what was the thing she was in before Trigger Point?
Line of Duty.
Yeah, it was awesome, wasn't it? Really, really good. So I had high expectations, and they actually had a bomb technician as a technical advisor on it as well. But I managed 10 minutes of it, and I just thought, this is horrendously crap.
Why?
Well, just the drama, like aircraft pilots when they're about to plough into a mountain. And they're like, yes, we're just descending into the mountain, and we're all going to die in the next... it's really calm and chilled, isn't it? And that's what we're like. When I'm doing a bomb, I'm at absolute peace. I'm in my peaceful place, to be honest with you. And I know that sounds crazy, but if I was landing the 747, then I would definitely crash it into the mountain. That would be courageous, that would be dangerous, it would be really quite tricky. But I've been doing this for 25 years. I joined the army, I got sort of, different awards for best recruit and a sword from Sandhurst and stuff like that. But I was a good soldier, but when I got into bomb disposal, I realised that was my calling. I had a gift for it. I could walk into a scene and tell straight away what had happened, tell if the bomb was about to go off or if it had already gone off. That's not really that difficult, to be fair. And usually tell you what type of device it was, look at the entire tactical design. And then now, the reason I went back out to do it was A, to not die with a load of gangsters in Soho, and B, I had this gift, this ability, and, I've gone out there, trained 200 guys and I did 85 IEDs in my entire army career, by the way, and several thousand conventional munitions. And I've done probably 900 improvised explosive devices in the last 3 years in Syria, Iraq, and Libya.
That's incredible. And that ability, when you say being at peace, if I understood your presentation correctly, that's come about after years of training where you deliberately put yourselves in extremely high-pressure situations. So
Exactly
once it
right.
comes to the real thing, it doesn't seem as bad. Now, for everyone in the room, we all deal with very high-pressure situations, but we don't get that kind of training. So should we be doing that in some way? How would you advise people in the room to get better at handling stressful?
I'll let you into a secret. The military doesn't teach you how to do it. You just learn through sort of immersion. And knowledge dispels fear. So, there's a saying, he who reads leads. If you can learn your tradecraft, whatever specialisation you're going into, if you're in a management position, you're not going to be able to learn every single nuance of all of the people, that work under you, are you? But what you can learn is the first principles. And I think knowledge definitely, first of all, it builds up your muscle memory. And secondly, it gives you confidence. And it also enables you to, when you're in a situation of extreme or even basic pressure, you can stand back, have that condor moment and actually break it down, rationalise it. And then once you've rationalised it, you can work out that, fear is an emotion, danger is real, and you compartmentalise it, and you basically just break it down into bite-sized chunks. In exactly the same way we do with, a minefield that's got 1 million improvised explosive devices. We start off, by doing some search around the outside, we mark it all off, and then over a period of years, we go and clear all the IEDs, one at a time. And each time we get to an IED as well, it's literally like absolute focus. Everything else just completely goes out of the window. What you're going to have for dinner that night, any sort of problems at home, whatever it might be. As soon as you're sort of hunched over that bomb, It's just complete and absolute focus. And as I said, peace as well. And you work out, this bird's nest loop of wires, how you're going to interpret that, what does it mean? Are there any other additional peripheral threats against you? Snipers, we work in an ISIS area now as well. There's constantly threats from ISIS. And then when you get there and you interpret that bird's nest loop of wires, you've got to work out, is it, a timed IED, in which case I need to do it quickly or get away? Is it, remote control, in which case I need to do it quickly or get away? Or is it a booby trap, victim operated, in which case I've got a little bit more time, but I really have to be very careful, So everything is methodical and process, but you can never have a 100% plan because there's so many unknowns. So you make a plan, you make a fallback plan as well, and then you've got to commit. You start that plan, and then you basically refine it as you go along, as you take each step towards the end goal. And remember, it's always about the goal, always about the end state. And I think sometimes, especially in industry, it's very easy for us to get sidetracked in what we call mission creep in the army,
Yeah, mission creep. I know what that's like at work. Question in the front, and please do raise your hand if you have a question. There's a...
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, that was fascinating. My father was in the RAF actually, and he ended up working for the British government in civil service.
Oh, wow.
Polish cavalry, Polish RAF in Britain, and then civil service. So I can, to a certain extent, I can relate, but not as much as I'd like to. And for that reason, I'd like to ask the question: how many more threats do you think from the press we could potentially see in relation to what Piers Morgan? I didn't realise that fatwa had been issued after that particular
same
situation.
Day, yeah.
So how much of a threat is the press in these kind of situations? Like, what could happen? What's the worst case scenario?
That's a really good question. And when I started working with the media, the military and the police are terrified of the media. They think they're all devils and they won't talk to them. And of course, that's the worst thing, is if you don't talk to somebody, then they're going to make stuff up. So I used to develop a relationship with them. The military wouldn't talk to them, so they called me into a briefing at the Ministry of Defence one day. To start with, I was a bit of a sort of outcast for talking to the media for about a year. And then I got called in for a secret briefing with General Messenger, the new head of the Royal Navy. And he said, right, we're going to give you a secret briefing as a civilian, and this is what's really happening, and we need you to use your judgment with the media to say what you think is releasable. Because if they're going to go off on a tangent or they're going to release something that they've discovered that's going to put soldiers, sailors, airmen, civilians' lives at risk, then we need to stop it. So it was good, because I would basically just say to them, look, if you print that, if you show that today, you're going to cause a loss of life. But here's something really meaty that you can talk about instead, and give it a week, and then you can still talk about that story. And they're usually very good at doing that too.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? In front here.
Hi, Justin Pearce, NDA. Similar sort of question, going back to that Piers Morgan story. Looking now at the media, how far do you think it's improved in terms of its responsibility in reporting such situations as in the Ukraine war at the moment? How much better have they got?
I think they're very responsible. I mean, certainly every decision, and I haven't been working closely with them for the last few years because I've been deployed overseas, but everything I've done has been remote, of course, as we all have. But when I was very much immersed in it, every decision would go through the lawyers, just in case. And that didn't used to happen. And when it comes to the armed forces, I think after the backlash against Piers Morgan, against the Mirror at the time, they decided that, it's not really good to attack the armed forces. Obviously, they should be held to account. Society puts the armed forces on a pedestal, and therefore you have to earn the right to stay there. So when you mess up, you need to be held to account. But if you decide to attack them and it's not fair, then I think society doesn't really appreciate it in general. And he lost respect and he lost his job ultimately at the end of the day. So I think there's definitely been improvements. But I still think, as we all do, if we have a number of priorities and a number of tasks and objectives to achieve, then we will always let something slip. We'll always do what we can get away with. And I think the media, by definition, the hacks especially, they need to do that. You know, that's what they're trained to do. That's what they're recruited for, having that sort of inherent skill set. So they're never going to be 100% innocent, I would say, but they're a lot better, definitely. That's just my personal opinion, by the way.
I think I can squeeze in one more question if anyone has one.
Hi, Rupin Shah from Thinkbox. I'm just curious, how do you reconcile family life and work? Because they must be such extremes. And you talked about you got married and so on. How does that sort of work with your partner and so on?
Well, I wasn't married for that long. We managed to last, when I left the army in 2006, we managed to last until, I think, 2011, we actually got the divorce through, yeah. I think 2 years we managed to stay together. And no, it was very, very different. I mean, it's a hugely different environment. And I'd also got a 4-book deal. So, you know, I was lucky. I left the army and was quite comfortable. What I didn't realise that, you know, going from a salary of 35 grand a year to not having to worry about money, you spend it quite quickly. And then when you get divorced, it all goes at once. But you still have to pay the tax bill after it's gone. So I spent years basically eating baked beans while my wife lived in this very comfortable house. But she's a great mum, by the way, and I have no animosity towards giving her a massive amount of money. But and now I've forgotten what the question was because I've just gone off on one. Yeah.
And balancing work and family life.
Yeah. So I did it quite badly to start with, I think, and I think that point I mentioned there. You know, I think we tend to do what we can get away with. And once it reaches critical mass, then we sort of tend to say to our boss, look, you know, I need to get home and do this, you know. And even then you feel guilty about doing it, which is ridiculous. So now I've got a wife who is massively supportive of what I do. I work in a country where she can actually come out to stay with me. She comes out every few weeks. I live in Iraqi Kurdistan, and I drive into federal Iraq every day. So Iraqi Kurdistan is like Dubai was 20 years ago. I mean, you get the occasional rocket attack from Iran, you know, big rockets. But it's, no worse than South London, really, you know. So, yeah, it's good. And, you know, communication, talking. And I think having a job where we actually make a difference. And I think we can all find that motivation in everything we do. There's that one thing that we know makes a difference in our work. Even if you're a banker, you know, you're keeping the country going. If the banks go down for 2 weeks, we go to Lord of the Flies, basically. You know, they have a vital function, in addition to obviously all the cocaine, and I'm just kidding, you know. They have a very, very vital function. So if you can find that just cause, basically, which for me, going back into bomb disposal is definitely it, you know. And I'm absolutely 100% at peace with myself and in my life. I actually feel proud of myself again for the first time in a long, long time. And my daughters no longer think I'm a knob end. You know, they used to say, how can you do bomb disposal? You always spill your food down the front of your shirt when you're eating. You're an absolute klutz, you know. Now they actually say, you know, we're actually quite proud of you, Dad, you know. And it's quite nice. So I think just communication, finding a job, or if you can't find another job, find what it is about that job where you can feel proud of yourself, that just cause. And my wife works with children with autism as well, so, you know, she's like Mary Poppins. So it's great, you know. It's, we chat to each other, and of course the other thing, to internet, WhatsApp is amazing, isn't it? So that's saved loads and loads of divorces in the military for sure.
So very quickly.
We haven't really talked about the Ukraine, so I'm just wondering about what you think the response could have been and how it could have been really, you know, global response in your eyes.
30 seconds on Ukraine. Go.
Okay, very quickly. We knew that Putin was going to do this, but we didn't know when. Half the world decided they were going to do something about it. A quarter of the world decided they weren't going to do as much, and a quarter of the world decided they weren't going to do anything at all because they needed Russia as an economic ally, or they didn't want to support NATO in the West. His battle plan was quite predictable. We were all surprised at how crap he was and how crap their command and control was. We were always terrified of them during the Cold War, and they basically didn't last 5 minutes before they started getting malleted by our rockets. What he's doing now, he absolutely can't be seen to lose face. So he's going to focus on the Donbass to the east. It's raining there at the moment, which means they're going to get bogged down, which means they're going to get attacked and suffer more attrition and casualties. But I think Russia needs a deep sea port to be a superpower again. And they need the Crimea and they need the East to be able to dominate Ukraine. And they provide 15% of the world's wheat. Ukraine provides about the same. They're either going to take it all, in which case they've profited, or they're going to destroy Ukraine's ability to produce it, in which case they've profited. So it's largely about, economic destruction and about the deep sea ports and Putin being an absolute lunatic.
Amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Really good questions. Please give Chris a big hand.
Thank you very much.